Tables are defined as collections of related data which are stored in a structured format in a database. In each table, we have columns and rows. A table is also sometimes referred to as a relation. In Postgres, we use create table statement in order to create tables in our database. A create table statement starts with create table keyword, followed by the table name. Then inside the parentheses, we need to list the list of columns in the table. For each column, we need to specify the column name first, then the data type associated with the column, and finally the constraint or constraints for each of the columns. We separate the columns using commas, and finally we close the parentheses. You can also specify constraints for the entire table. I'm not going to get into all the details associated with the create table statement. You can find it on the in the online manual or in the slides. Let's start with a simple example. In this example, we are creating a table named student. Then inside the parentheses, you can see we have 4 columns in our table. The first column is a student ID or std_ID. The data type for this column is integer, which means that whole numbers. And the constraint for this column is primary key. A primary key is a column whose values are used to uniquely identify the rows in a table. In other words, when you set the primary key constraint for a column, it means that the values for that column needs to be unique. You cannot also leave the values for a primary key column blank. The second column is first name. The data type for first name is set to varchar 50. Varchar stands for varying character, which means that you can put a variable length of characters in this column. The number that comes after varchar determines the maximum number of characters this column can store. For example, in our example, first name can store strings of characters between 0 to 50 characters. For the first name column, we also used the constraint not null, which means that we cannot leave the values blank. The third column is last name. The data type is varchar 50, which is the same as first name, and the constraint is also not null. The last column is email. We set the data type to varchar 200, which means that we can add or store characters up to 200, and the constraints are unique and not null, which means that the values, the email addresses has to be unique, and also we cannot leave the email address blank. Now let's try this in our database. I've already logged into my database on the core server in my web browser. The next thing you need to do is select your designated database, and then you need to open the query tool. You can click on the query tool button right here, which takes you to the query tool. Now whatever query you want to run, you need to type it in here. For convenience, I'm going to copy paste our sample query in here to save time. So as you can see, I have our example here, create table student with student ID, first name, last name, email address, and all the constraints we have defined for all our columns. Also note that after the last column, no comma is required. If you have a comma, your query will not run and you will get an error. To run your query, you can press F5 key on your keyboard or click on the execute button on the toolbar here. So once you click on the toolbar, on the execute button in the toolbar, if you don't have any syntax error, you should be able to see query returned successfully and the amount of time for the query to run. So in this example, I did not have any errors in my query, and my query returned successfully. Now to check to see if my table has been created, you can click on your database name, go to schemas, and under public, under tables, you can see that I only have the spatial ref system default table in my database. The reason is that the list of table on the left pane does not get automatically refreshed. Therefore, after creating, adding, or removing tables, you need to right click here on the tables and click refresh. Then you should be able to see your newly created table student. And even if you click on the table student, you should be able to see the column names under the column section.